Not go well for you. Okay. All right, here we go, guys. Make sure you give your full attention, please.
Hi.
So Doug, if you can start us off, tell us what the heck a carpenter is.
Well, that's a good question. But first, I want to tell you that I was a freshman at this school, and I calculated, I think, 49 years ago.
No, it can't be.
Well, I graduated 47 maybe. So I know where you are. The building looks a little different. But anyway, my career has been being a carpenter, and there's a lot of different types of carpentry work. There's different subcategories, like a finished carpenter, a rough framing carpenter, a concrete forming carpenter. That there's a lot of different subcategories. I kind of stumbled into the field because it was kind of my family path. My grandfather was a carpenter, general contractor. My father was a woodworker, carpenter also. In fact, he used to teach in this very building. And I took every one of his shop classes in school.
You had to, right?
I probably had to. He always gave me an A, but I think that's because I did the dishes at home or something. But anyway, my job entails, the best part really is I get to work with my hands a lot. I get to build cool stuff. So it's very satisfying at the end of a project that there's this tangible thing there that so I can still go around town and say, oh yeah, I helped with that, or I was really involved with that. So there's the skills of being a carpenter would be, you have to have a relatively solid, basic math background. Doesn't have to be too crazy, because look at me, I can do it, right? I didn't get too far in the math world. And then you have to like to work with your hands. And in Alaska, you also have to not mind working out in the elements. Like today, I think you'd hope you were working on an indoor project today. And the other thing other skill you have to have are kind of the job skills. Most importantly, the ability to get along with your teammates, and also the ability to communicate with your clients or the people that are hiring you to do whatever it is they want you to do. That's pretty important. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yes, we hear that a lot, that last part you just said.
The other thing too, and this was a pet peeve of my father, so then it became a pet peeve of mine, is that back to the job skill thing. If someone's like eager and willing to learn and they keep showing up, they're going to be the preferred teammate or coworker or employee versus somebody that maybe thinks they know everything already and they don't show up on time, or they call in too often with the brown bag flu. Do we know what that is? The brown bag flu? Okay, well you can tell them later.
Yeah.
So it's more important to be a good teammate and have some good job skills, and then you can learn as you go, than those other things I mentioned. Anyway.
Yeah, we keep hearing that over and over again. You go a long ways in life if you show up in time and you're eager to learn. It's very important. You talked a little bit about how there's a wide variety of projects that a carpenter might be hired to do. Can you kind of give us a few examples of maybe projects that you've been involved in, or different projects that carpenters would take on?
So yes, I'm going to say from the skill level and the amount of time to learn those skills, probably the first skills a carpenter would learn, and the first types of jobs that they'd be working on would be the framing, the structural framing of a building. Because there's, it's more basic, it's not super fine work. You don't have to be super accurate like you would be if you were doing the interior trim work or building some built-in cabinets or something. So you'd have the framing as one subcategory, and then even though it's not necessarily cutting boards into big boards into littler pieces, there's the roofing world, which your teacher, Mr. Bullock, knows all about because that's his summer gig. But that's also kind of oftentimes falls into the carpentry realm, is roofing. Then another very big category is concrete work. And not so much the finishing of a surface of a slab, making it perfect, or troweling it or grinding it smooth, but doing the forming for retaining walls and foundations and piers and bridges and anything. That's a pretty big component. So a lot of times on a commercial project, there'll be a team of carpenters, and their specialty really is the concrete forming phase. And then we could jump ahead to, as your skills increase and as you get maybe a little older and you don't really want to lift things that are so heavy, the finish work. And that can be the exterior finish work of a structure. So, the siding and the window installation and door installation and everything on the outside of the building that is like the final layer. And then you have the interior finish work, which would be, the wooden flooring and the trim and hanging all the doors, installing the cabinetry, etc. And then kind of the next level would be someone who might have the ability to do fine woodworking. So you would be doing built-in furniture in a sense. Bookcases, built-in closet shelving, fireplace mantles, maybe custom cabinets for the whole kitchen, for example. That you're starting to get towards cabinet maker, which sort of can be an offshoot of the carpentry career to become a cabinet builder. And then the next step beyond that, if you're really into the fine woodworking, would be building some custom furniture too. So,
Oh yes, so lots of different directions.
a lot of options.
And then can you talk a little bit about kind of what you did or you do in those fields? A little bit about everything?
You answered your own question. So I, fortunately, have had the opportunity to kind of do all of those things. Sometimes I get a job and I get to build some custom furniture for people, which is really fun, especially in the winter. I have a nice wood shop. I can build dining room tables and chairs, and that's really fun. My company, I decided a long time ago that I became a general contractor, but mainly it was so I got to pick what projects I worked on, right? If I just stayed as a carpenter working for others, then, I was at the mercy of whoever owned the company of what project I worked on. So I started my own company, And we did, like when we build a custom house, for example, we pretty much do the whole thing. So we do the foundation work, framing, exterior finish, roofing, although sometimes we hire Mr. Bullock to put the shingles on. And then, the interior finish work, some custom built-in stuff, and all the way to the end. Even nailing on the house numbers and putting up the mailbox, right? That's pretty much the end. Washing the windows. I guess that's really the end. So I've been lucky. I get to do pretty much all phases, but I have coworkers and other friends in the field that, they really specialize in one thing or the other. So they become really good at whatever their thing is. And like, a couple people I know have cabinet shops and they just build nice cabinets and, some custom built-in stuff that they deliver to the job site and then we install it. Another classmate of mine just became a hardwood flooring person. So he lays the floors, sands them, finishes them. That was his career and he did just fine doing that.
Would you say in general, Doug, that in Juneau, carpenters tend to have do more variety of things versus maybe down south in like a bigger city?
I think that's true, yes. Because of the competition and the pool of workers, right? You kind of have to be able to not be a one-trick pony, right? You have to be able to do a few different things. If you, like in Juneau, let's say, you were just a framer, you'd be busy for part of the year, but it wouldn't carry you through the whole season. So, it'd be good to have a couple different skills.
Awesome, that's a great answer. Let's say one of these young people here is interested in getting into carpentry. What kind of training would they need, or maybe what would your advice be in terms of after high school, or maybe in the summertime during high school? What kinds of things, what kinds of opportunities might they look for, or might they try to take advantage of?
Okay. I was kind of thinking about that before I came down. Mr. Bullock gave me a warning of what Mr. Hinckley might be asking me. So there's a lot of paths to get to being what I would call a journeyman level carpenter, right? On the job is probably, it's pretty common where, as a high school age person, or even a, out of high school age person, you would get hired on by harassing the general contractor on a particular job. And you have to harass them more than once, right? You don't go by there once and say, hey, you got any space for somebody that's willing to do anything? And they might say, no, we're staffed up, right? But if you keep going back, like the next, let's maybe skip a day, but like go back, like bug them, right? And keep going back, and then they're gonna say, oh, well, maybe this young person is in fact really interested in working. So I've actually hired, probably most people that I've hired that I didn't know that just came to a job site, I didn't hire them the first time, and I probably didn't hire them the second time. But after the third or fourth time, just to have them quit bugging me, I'd probably give them something to do. So, on the job, persistent, that is one path. And that could start at any time, right? You don't have to wait till you're older to do that. The other is, in high school, you can take some of the industrial arts classes. There's some carpentry classes. I think that would be good, because then you get the basics. You certainly get the the book knowledge that would be really helpful. Then, out of high school, again, with that background, you'd have more in your resume, so to speak, to, tell a contractor that at least you've done this, right? And that also shows that you're interested. There's also the, after high school, there's a trade school route where the state union, carpenters union, they take people and turn them into apprentices, and it's a combination of coursework, on-the-job training, coursework, back and forth, and that gives people a really solid background. From my experience, those people that have been through that come out pretty good. I would say those the apprenticeship trade program, just the way the land is in Alaska, those tend to guide you more into the commercial end of things, because a lot of the commercial jobs have a union workforce, whereas a lot of the residential building that's done in Alaska doesn't have a union workforce. So that's another like fork in the road there. And then also, like in my case, I went to school and I worked summer jobs with my dad building houses, and then I went off to college, got a college degree in industrial arts, and which that gave me some skills that I wasn't getting just on the job working with my dad. Like I took some electricity, house wiring classes, and some mechanical classes, and some metalworking classes that aren't directly related to being a carpenter, but they certainly are directly related to being a general contractor, because you kind of have to know the whole process, or what's going on. When the plumber shows up, you kind of have to know what you're asking him to do for you.
That makes sense, yes. Could you talk about that a little bit? So we've talked about this with a few other speakers, but I do think this is really important. You talked about being a team player and working with everyone, but you also talked about understanding what the electrician has to do, what the plumber has to do. How does that work on a job site when you're working with different tradespeople? Can you kind of just explain what that's like a little bit, and how that functions, and maybe
right,
how important that is?
Yes. So I mentioned, as a general contractor, you're ultimately responsible for all the work that's done on a particular, let's just say we're building a custom house, which is kind of my gig. Even though you might hire some subcontractors that come in to do a specific job, like the plumbing and heating, let's say, you still need to know quite a bit about that system and what they're doing, so that you can work with them about what they need you to do, what you need them to do. It would be kind of bad if you just you called the plumber or the electrician and said, okay, the house is ready, call me when it's done, right? That doesn't really work. I mean, they could come in and make it work, but it's probably not what you were expecting. So that's another thing, that even as a carpenter, you should bone up on the other trades that you'll always be working with. And they're gonna tend to be the mechanical trades, like electricians, the plumbing and heating guys, the HVAC guys, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning people. Those are three trades that usually a carpenter doesn't get involved in, unless they're just trying to do everything. But you need to know what those systems are, so you would need to educate yourself on that. And the other thing Mr. Hinckley mentioned was working together as a team. I have to admit, through my life, I've tried a couple other jobs, Like, okay, this carpentry thing, that was just a temporary deal. I'm gonna go to my real job. And I try that for a year or so. And I think, I guess maybe I kind of miss this. Working with my hands, but the most important thing I missed was working with my teammates, my coworkers. So my closest relationships in my life, maybe my wife, my son, but my really close relationships and my lifelong friends have been my coworkers. You spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week at least with somebody like you're really working with them right there. You're working together on something. So over the years, you really develop some good camaraderie and friendships, and that's almost the best part. And that's when I'd go to, try another job. Like I tried this teaching gig a couple of times, but I just really missed that. And now that I'm trying to be retired, but a lot of my buddies are still working. I have to go visit their job sites, to make sure they're doing it right or something. But anyway.
I like that's a good answer. You touched on this at the beginning. You said math skills are important. I am a math teacher, and I like hearing that. Could you talk a little bit specifically about what kinds of math skills a carpenter might use?
Well, yes. That would be geometry, and probably geometry. Maybe some trig in there, but I never even needed to get that far, right? With some basic geometry, and you can do a lot, right? But you need to be able to certainly lay out shapes and predict what the length of basically, like let's say you're doing a roof, you need to be able to quickly know the math to know how long this rafter is going to be if you know this and this, right? I mean, that's, you've got to know that. So geometry at least, trigonometry would be great. But you guys, you're smart, you're a smart looking bunch. You'll probably be like calculus 3. Do they make that?
How about even before that? How about you need to know anything about fractions in this?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So that's, that's the everyday thing, right? Is feet and inches and fractions, and I don't know why we haven't gone to the metric system, quite frankly, because that sure would be a lot easier, but that's not the case. So everything's feet and inches, except, shingles, they're a meter. So what's up with that? There's a few products that come onto the job that aren't feet and inches, like you go to the cabinet shop. You go to the local custom cabinet shop. They go by a metric system, which is kind of funny. So when you give them your measurements, the first thing they do is convert all your measurements to millimeters, centimeters and millimeters. But yeah, that's, basic math is very important, and the ability to use your tape measure and divide fractions becomes pretty second nature, right? I do have to tell you a quick funny story that happened to me one day. We had this long tape measure, like a surveyor's tape. So it goes out like 200 feet, so it's not made of steel, it's made of a nylon stuff. We don't use it when we had to be really accurate because it stretches a bit, but this was just for kind of a rough layout of this foundation. So you lay the foundation out, and to make sure the corners are square, you have to make sure the two diagonal measurements from this corner to this corner, and this corner to this corner, they have to equal each other, right? That makes it square. So we get it all laid out, we check it, okay, it's almost perfect. Let's move this one an inch this way, like we're dialing it in. And then all of a sudden we get a measurement, and all of a sudden it was like wrong. So we go, oh man, and so we move it again, we get it, and okay, that's getting close, but not perfect, and then we'd move it a little bit, and then I'd check it again, and it'd be completely wrong. Well, after about an hour or more, I finally realized that the tape measure had two sides. One was the Carpenter side, which is feet and inches. The other side are what engineers use, which are feet and tenths of a foot, right? So a tenth of a foot is nothing like a 12th of a foot. So we get this measurement, it was just messing us up, and finally, I think I threw the thing away. Anyway, well, we had to laugh at ourselves on that.
That answers my next question. So you do not use tenths of inches, you use feet and inches.
We do, unless the engineer or surveyor are there, because they give all their numbers, not metric, but feet and tenths of feet. So, 12.5 feet or something. Like in my mind, that's 12 feet, 6 inches. But sometimes you'll get your survey and they'll show you a distance from the property line where the structure's supposed to be, and it would be feet and tenths of feet. And then there's one other really goofy one. When you have a plan of trusses, like from the truss factory, their dimensions are feet, inches, 16ths. So like you get your measurement and it says, it will tell you the length of the rafter, and you use that to order your metal roofing because it's the most accurate measurement you have. And it might say, 15, it'll just have a number, 15-2-7. So you've got to really kind of pay attention to whatever the sheet of paper or the plan you have, what they're using for measurements.
So that 7 would be 7/16 of an inch.
Yeah. Or instead of putting a half inch, it would say 8. 15
Just to keep you
-2
on your
-8.
toes. Keep you on your toes. Yeah. So I'm hearing as math is very important. I like that. So many of you in my math class. So keep with those math skills, very important. Can you talk a little bit, Doug? It's always fun to talk about tools. I know you use a lot of tools in your job. And carpenters use tool belts. I'm assuming you have a tool belt on most of the time.
Yep.
Can you talk about kind of what tools, you can kind of choose any tools you want, but tools that you like, tools that you think are really important, and maybe tools that you carry with you on your tool belt. Just
Yes.
highlight a few.
So, that's one good thing about, as a carpenter, like I mentioned earlier, you start off as maybe a framing person or a helper to a framer, but you're still going to have your basic, you've always got your tool belt on, and it better have a tape measure. Where are you going to write these down? Tape measure, pencil, square.
Do you have a pencil like these guys have, or does it look a little different?
Well, I usually have a flat-sided pencil. It's called a Carpenter's pencil. There's a reason that it's shaped that way. And there's a correct way to sharpen the silly thing. I should have brought one, right? It's this long rectangular lead, so it's flat. So mainly it gives you can sharpen it really sharp from the side, but also it lasts it lasts 10 times longer than a regular pencil, and it doesn't break off as easily. So it's more durable, lasts longer. You can sharpen it up. It has its function. Tape measure, pencil, square, like your portable square. So we just call them a speed square, or you can have a combination square, which is the one that has the little base with the sliding blade in there. Either one of those is acceptable. Some people have their favorites. Utility knife, because you got a sharpened pencil. Hammer, your favorite hammer, and of course there's a million kinds. Depends on what you're doing, but mostly you're going to have a smooth face, 16 to 20 ounce hammer for most things. I usually have a little framing chisel in there, and I usually have a little 4-in-1 or a shoemaker's rasp in there. Kind of cover up my mistakes. Let's see, chalk line.
Ooh, can you tell us what a chalk line is? I'm guessing there's some guys.
Oh, chalk line is just a spool of string, and it's encapsulated in a little container that's full of powdered chalk, usually blue, but you can get all sorts of different colors. Pull it out, hook one end on something, and pull it, and it gives you the straight line, and you can just snap it like that, and it leaves a straight line on whatever surface you need a straight line on, either for cutting or for laying out something on the floor. So anyway, those are the basic tools that would be in your tool belt, no matter what you were really doing. Then, outside your tool belt, you'd have to have your framing square. You'd have to have a level of some type. And then some kind of saw to make big boards into little ones. And those are the very basics.
Can you talk a little bit about, you just maybe jumped into power tools, how about a couple of power tools that you use? Or
Okay, by far the most common power tool would be your power circular saw. You use that like all the time. And then of course, probably the next most critical one would be a drill. But now, with so many cordless drills, it's going to probably be a battery-powered drill and a battery-powered impact driver and some batteries and a charger to keep them going. And then of course the appropriate drive bits and drill bits for them. That would be the really basics. But if you get into let's say you kind of like putting on metal roofing, right? And you kind of do that, you're going to need the sheet metal toolbox with your different right hand cutting shears, left hand, straight. Little hand brakes, little benders, hot rivet gun, it's all fun.
lots of tools.
And then,
You
then
said-
on
you said the belt buckle.
and then on a job site too, there's gonna be a few stationary tools, right? There's gonna be not right at first, but as soon as there's some kind of shelter, you're gonna have a job site table saw, stationary table saw, you're gonna have a job site chop saw, or compound bevel miter box, maybe might be the appropriate name, but everybody just calls it a chop saw. And I'm sure you've seen those around. And some job sites, depending on what kind of house it is and the level of custom things, you're gonna have a jointer there, probably, and even a surface planer on the job at minimum.
Lots of tools.
I have garages full of tools.
Can you talk a little bit about if you are kind of an apprentice carpenter, are you expected to own all of your own tools if you're working for somebody, like if you're coming to work for you or work for maybe a larger commercial company or something like that? How does that work in terms of owning your tools and acquiring tools and all of that?
I think you would be expected to have that first basic list, your tool belt and the tools that you carry on your person would be your own personal things. And probably, framing square level. But as far as the power tools, I think you'd have to have your own drill and impact driver, because that's pretty common these days. You actually almost carry those with you now. But beyond that, I don't think you have to provide your own extension cord, and certainly no stationary power tools. That would be up to the general contractor to have that kind of stuff. But most carpenters I know, they just can't resist tools, right? So they just keep buying them anyway until they show up, their truck's full of tools.
These guys are catching up, writing all this good stuff down. Here is the question that kids often are most interested in, and it's usually the hardest one to answer. Could you speak to a little bit what kind of money an apprentice carpenter ballpark might be making, and then kind of maybe the range for a journeyman and a master carpenter down the road?
Okay. I don't really know that answer that first part, like what another general contractor like me would hire, like a green person. So you're gonna be hired kind of as a laborer at first, with the assumption that you wanna learn some skills. But, I'm gonna say 18 to 22 bucks an hour is kind of right in there for a young person, because you're asking them to do a little bit more than you would be working at a retail store or a restaurant or something, because you're asking them to have their own transportation, you're asking them to have their own basic tools. You are asking them to work outside in the inclement weather also, which is another thing you're gonna have, right? Rain gear, rubber boots, rubber gloves, hard hat, right? I'm not sure your name, but that was a good guess.
Yeah, I was a union apprentice for a little bit, and starting out it's like around 23.
Okay, so and that makes sense, because I think the union apprentice would make more than the non-union person. But the union apprentice has to pay some union dues, it's right, so it kind of evens out. And then as you work along, I would say, like in this day and age, if I were hiring a fully skilled carpenter, that I could just say, okay, I want you to hang all these interior doors. I want you to install all these interior doors, and they better be perfect. I would expect I'm going to be paying north of $50 an hour for someone that has that skill set. A framer, maybe, like a journeyman framer, I'm going to say in Juneau, the low 40s. Okay, and then if you really are, kind of a career craftsman, and you can really do anything, like, here, build this set of cabinets and install them, and, right, some higher end skills, then I think you're gonna get up to in the $60 an hour range. I'm in this climate that we're in right now. That'd be my guess. And that answer your question?
That answers.
I mean, so I've been able to make a living being a carpenter and then a general contractor, etc. And I never really. I guess I never really had the goal of really making a bunch of money and being a rich guy and retire when I'm 50. I just wanted to make a good living, satisfying job, and you got to make a pretty good amount of money to even be able to live in Juneau, right? It's an expensive place to live, so. I would say it's certainly a path to being able to take care of yourself.
That's a great answer. I like that. And I will say, I'll add, I had an opportunity many years ago to help build a house, and I worked with some framers who were from Montana, young kids. And interesting enough, they said in Montana, all the framers get paid by the square foot.
Right, it's a piece job.
Piece job,
Yeah.
which I assume that probably doesn't happen very often in Juneau.
It has, in periods of time when there's been a building boom in Juneau, which I've seen several, there'll be so much work that people actually will come here from other places, and they'll just come as their sheetrockers or their framers or their insulators or something, and they bid the job, and it's based on the square footage or the number of pieces of sheetrock they install, or, you know, the square footage of insulation they install. So those types of things are really geared towards the high-speed production, because they can be, because they don't have to be quite as accurate as other parts of the project. And, you know, if people get really good and efficient and fast, it'll be a square footage thing.
I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, and if you're good at something and you don't mind doing the same thing repetitively, you can make really good money.
It's a good segue into my next question. This is something Mr. Bullock and myself, we talk about a lot in all of our shop classes. We talk about how obviously skills are very important, and knowing, you know, having the ability to do all of these different things that you might be asked to do or that you might have to do in a job. But we also talk about working with efficiency and working with a sense of urgency. Could you kind of talk about how those things come into play in your job, and just kind of how you can approach a project in maybe the most efficient way, or how you can improve those things as
Yes.
you're working?
So, it's, especially in Juneau, for example, the biggest glitch that I see on projects is when you haven't thought ahead to have all the materials that you need on hand before you're ready to do whatever it is you're gonna do, right? Because sometimes you want something that's not even in Juneau. So, you know, as a lead carpenter, let's say, and you know you're gonna be building a house for Mr. Ingley, you know, you're gonna want to plan ahead the whole process and have all the materials that you're gonna need delivered to Juneau on the site, like way before you actually need them. And it's really important to do. So that's a big part of, you know, whether it's the lead carpenter or the general contractor, it's a huge part of their job is to plan, get the materials there. And then the other part is to, you know, you don't get to work at 8 o'clock or 7:30 or whatever, and then decide what you're gonna do that day, right? That's why the lead carpenter and the general contractor make a little more money, is that they spend their mornings and evenings planning the next day. So, like, for example, when I get up early, you know, not as early as my wife, but maybe I get up at 5:30, let's say. I got my coffee, I make my daily list of all the tasks we're gonna do that day on that particular job, and then I'll have each job assigned to, you know, whomever on the crew I want to work on that. So that when I get to work and people show up, I can just quickly go through my list, and, you know, it can change, but it's, when the carpenters show up or the crew shows up, it's not like they're waiting around for any kind of instruction. And as far as urgency, that's something that's you just gotta have that built-in work ethic. And I got mine from my father, and he got his from my grandfather. They had a rule that you couldn't sit down during the workday. That's a little extreme, but like if there was a sawhorse there, you know, I can remember my dad saying, "That's not a chair. That's not for sitting. You can sit down and eat your lunch," right? So, I mean, my family, they, being in the trades, they really had this, there wasn't any sitting around. So, I remember my dad, like, maybe he yelled at me, probably, but you know, if all of a sudden you kind of got done or something, you're never really done on a job site, because you can always start cleaning up, or even sweeping the floor, or getting all the trash out. I mean, there's always something to do, and you know, the best workers even if you're a carpenter, you know, and you've been working for 30 years and you think you know everything, the best ones are the ones that it's not beneath them to clean up and take the garbage out to the dumpster and get the place all spick and span for the next day. But yeah, there's really no sitting around, and it's frowned upon if you're sitting around. And also, one other thing along those lines, to me, if your workday starts at 8, that has nothing to do with when you're driving up to the job site, right? 8 means you've already parked your car, you've already had your coffee, you've already had your donut, you've already got your tool belt on, you've already got your assignment. So when 8 o'clock comes around, you're actually working at 8 o'clock. You're not like walking in at 8 o'clock. And that, I'm afraid that's led to a few, you know, that drives me crazy. Somebody drives up at 8, and everybody else is already working, right? Because it's 8 o'clock. And somebody drives up at 8 and gets out of their car. They don't seem to last very long.
This is something I talk about with these guys all the time. You can practice this skill every single class period of every day.
That's right.
When the bell rings, you have your paper out, your pencil ready.
Yeah. I mean, the secret to success in my job really is you just keep showing up till it's done. It's kind of a simple formula. Just keep showing up till it's done.
That's a good formula. Well, on that note, you've touched on all kinds of good advice, but if someone here is considering a career in carpentry, and you could give them any advice moving forward, what kind of advice might you lend them?
Well, certainly at this stage, you know, take some industrial arts classes, kind of see if there's any branch of the trades there that you kind of like. You know, decide if working with your hands and your brain are what you want to do. Decide if you don't mind working outside and not inside all the time. You know, and make sure you get the basic math skills, because this is the time to get them, because they're free. They're free here. When you get out of here, you got to pay. So get all the free stuff you can.
I like that. Good answer. It's funny thing. Sometimes you're not ready to learn it when it's free.
No, I know.
Then you want to go
I
pay
know.
for it later.
I know.
Mr. Bullock, do you have any other questions that you'd like to throw Doug's way?
Just a huge thanks for taking time out of your day to be here.
That was really fun.
Absolutely.
Really fun.
Let's open it up to questions from these guys. James?
What was the hardest job you've worked
Like, as far as the most difficult one to manage, that's a great question. And it comes down to not the job, but who were the most difficult customers, right? So I can't say their names, but you know, I've had a couple of very elaborate custom homes that I built that probably took, you know, a year and a half to build. And you know, only a couple times in my whole career did I have any clients that I was really, really glad when we got done, right? So that's what makes it difficult. As far as technically difficult, that's tricky. I did one house that kind of stands out as being technically difficult because of the early foundation work. Part of the house was a bridge over a pretty good sized stream. So we had to build these 4 big concrete pillars on either, you know, 2 on each side of the stream that I think like the living room spanned across the stream. So that was difficult and fun and challenging, and you know, they tapered in and had some designs in there and stuff. So that was a technically challenging.
Question, James. Other questions for Doug? Maybe you just answered all the questions already. There you go.
Where do you go to college?
I graduated from Oregon State in Corvallis, Oregon.
Coincidentally, they just beat the Ducks. I don't know. If
Beavers,
Oh,
yep.
yeah.
No way.
They just had a big game.
Yeah, beat the Ducks.
Unbelievable.
They were down by 28 points. 28-point comeback.
They usually don't do that.
Yeah, I know, right?
When I was there, they had a really good basketball team. They really good basketball. They called it the Orange Express. That's the school color. I have to admit, though, I went to a couple other colleges before I ended up at Oregon State. I did a lot of hopping around, but that's where I finally got my degree.
Other questions we have for Doug before we let him go here?